What up? So today we're going to have a look at the top five alternatives to Fivetran in kind of like 2026, I suppose. Now, why would we want alternatives to Fivetran? Well, everybody kind of always has and has gone for things like Airbyte or Matillion, but with AI and skills and all the different frameworks and tools that are coming out today, it looks a little different than it used to because you're not quite as heavily incentivized to shy away from non out of the box connectors as we perhaps used to. So let's check out a few of the key competitors and some of their pros, cons, and kind of where you lose out on them or where you win on them. Now, an option that has kind of always been around and is making a bit of a comeback, to be honest. I've bunched them all together because writing custom Python and writing Python within an open source or reusable framework is kind of the same or kind of similar these days, given that agents and AI can just take the standards from whichever one you want to use and write code that does ingestion adhering to those standards. So with frameworks like DLT, you again get a few verified or out of the box sources, but the goal is that the framework is so simple to use that you could write one for pretty much any source you wanted in barely any time at all. And looking at Meltano, we have a very similar situation where there's loads and loads of connectors here, but the approach from Meltano is, I would say, slightly different, where DLT expects a connector to almost just be like a single file or a couple of little files within a repo. A Meltano connector is usually like a standalone GitHub repo or at least directory full of different components that support these connectors. So that means if you wanted to get data out of something like Tableau, then they have connectors like this that are maintained by the community. So in this case, you'd have to trust this suspect sounding G the sheep fella and use his tap to get your data out of Tableau into wherever it's going. When it comes to these like custom connectors, we can see that DLT are very heavily in on that. They have a page about how to use Open API to generate new sources or use their like REST API source configurator to just provide a schema and run it that way. Meltano do a similar thing where a Meltano connector will look something like a client, which is kind of a predefined Python template class they give you. You just fill in with how to connect to this platform and a list of streams, which is kind of like the schema for everything you're going to pull from an API or wherever. And if we take a really quick look at a DLT one, you can see it looks fairly similar, where we can define a Python function as a source and then just use their kind of blanket REST API config to pass like a schema and some other API configuration to a very basic JSON object. And bam, we have a connector to a new platform. Easy. But the obvious question is, how much am I going to maintain or have to fix or look after those kind of pre-made connectors? Well, if you're using ones out of the box that the rest of the community are looking at, you're going to get all of their help for free too. But for your own ones, these days, your agents and your AI are going to help you look after that. So if I was running DLT, Meltano, or just straight up Python ingestion code on a platform like Orchestra and it fails, I can send an agent off to go and look into that for me. And it's going to be guided by DLT or Meltano's kind of framework and make it way easier for it to understand and fix that without me having to write a custom connector for a platform that I'm also paying for, or wait for them to update the code so that I can ingest data from a new tool. So as much as this used to be kind of the feared and kind of bad way of doing data ingestion, it's definitely becoming a lot more popular now that you can use agents to build this cheaply and quickly with no dependencies on anybody else or other tools, as well as enforce testing and verification and add all of those kind of engineering extra bits around the edge for each one you build to make sure it's as robust as it's going to be. And for Orchestra, we're seeing a whole bunch more people do this and even ask for, how can we migrate from Fivetran to DLT or something like that. Next on our hit list, we have Estuary. Now, for anyone that's not heard of Estuary as one of the slightly newer tools we'll talk about here, its focus is on making your ingestion and data movement a lot more stream related than perhaps some of the other batch tools that have been and are currently available. So in a world where AI and online customer experience and bits like that are becoming super crucial and almost commoditized, Estuary fits in pretty well in terms of making sure you have live data coming to you everywhere. When comparing it to some of our other tools, we also have these pre-built connectors that you can see on their site. I would say it's probably not quite as broad and vast as tools like Airbyte, but all of the kind of key ones here, such as database replication, Amazon services, Google services, Databricks, bits like that, the kind of common ones you'll find in data engineering, including Google Sheets, which is our best friend. So it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be losing out or missing any integrations that you might really care about. But there is still the possibility slash option to build custom connectors for Estuary. And just because it's streaming orientated, you can still do batch or streaming. It kind of blends the two together to help your batch sources become more streamy and your streaming ones continue doing what they're doing. With Estuary as well, you have to consider the kind of deployment type you're looking for, whether you're going to do it internally, bring your own cloud, do it on theirs, all sorts of things to take into account. But if we go to their pricing page, it's a little clearer. We actually have some mention of monetary value on this one. And we also have a pricing calculator to help us estimate our actual usage based on the current kind of data we're ingesting right now. So pretty clear on that side of things. Now, Estuary is obviously very powerful, and it does have a lovely UI that users can use to connect to their sources and kind of manage things. But I would say on the general spectrum, it's slightly more developer orientated compared to some of the other tools in terms of how you can do things in the background with the CLI and set up custom connections, but also the things it kind of asks you to care about, which I would argue, perhaps in terms of terminology and concepts, relate themselves a little more to specialist data engineers. That said, definitely a great tool for anyone to try out, given the real-time nature of the data processing. We have probably one of the most common or even talked about ELT tools of the past few years, which is Airbyte. Now, Airbyte is primarily open source, but there is kind of a paid version that you can get for Airbyte Cloud. So in terms of pricing, it can or cannot be compared to Fivetran, but it's kind of up to you how you deploy it, really. So what's kind of good about Airbyte? Well, there's a whole bunch of kind of pre-built connectors straight out of the box. So if we have a quick browse of their website, you can see there is absolutely loads of these pre-built connections. And they also give you the option that you can build your own custom connectors if there's one that you need and don't have here. And you can see they kind of rate these at various different levels of support, depending on kind of how invested they are in maintaining them, I suppose. And if we look around more of the docs, it kind of confirms that picture of custom connectors are part of what they offer you. They have some capabilities like CDC, and they even kind of support like unstructured data or vector database destinations, which are becoming more popular these days. When it comes to pricing for their kind of data replication, there is a pricing page on site, but I gotta say, it's not the clearest. We come down here, things get a little clearer, but we still don't get like an exact price. So a little difficult to compare to Fivetran just on the website alone. But overall, Airbyte looks like a fairly solid alternative. It even comes with a UI, client CLI interaction, an API, Terraform, Airbyte for custom connectors, all sorts of sort of dev tools to go with it. This means it kind of caters a little bit to both people who want to do things in the UI and developers who want to do things in the back end. Though I would say the support of some of the connectors and the general UI functionality has been generally reported to lack a bit here and there. And it's not really in the open source tools manifesto to maintain some of it. So just be careful and make sure you test what you want to connect to before you go in and buy it. Next up, we have Matillion, probably one of the, I'd say, older or more seasoned tools in our catalog today. And It's definitely one that has been considered a lot more kind of enterprisey than some of the others, but it does roughly the same job in terms of batch loading data from one place to your warehouse, so nothing revolutionary. And if we were to look for what kind of connectors we get with Matillion, as far as I can tell, I can book a demo or start a free trial. There's not really much else to see on the website, but if we jump into their documentation, we can again see there is a fairly decent list of pre-canned connectors you get with Matillion. Again, it's probably not quite as comprehensive as maybe Airbyte or Estuary were, but the core of most businesses is still over there with Stripe and SQL databases and platforms like that. And again, Matillion comes with its own UI or kind of app. And this was one of the sort of main features people liked originally, as this kind of graphical pipeline building interface that you get with Matillion that you can then use to kind of construct and manage your pipelines. Though I think it's probably looking a bit worse for wear after all these years, but that's still part of it. You can trigger jobs via the API or from different tools if you want to. But as you can see on the left, over the years, Matillion has grown quite a lot, and there is a lot to learn about Matillion if you would like to use it. So probably has a lot of comprehensive tools that would be useful to users, but there is a fairly steep learning curve associated with that. And as we said earlier, Matillion is fairly enterprise aimed, so you would expect it to come with tiered pricing, and it does. So you can see we look like developers, teams, or kind of enterprise, as we usually see, with a whole list of features you kind of unlock in each tier. Beyond that, Matillion is credit-based, so you pay for credits and then consume them based on how much compute and data your data movement uses. So overall, fairly decent looking tool, but not sure it provides us any massive advantages of the ones we've seen so far. Next, we have Stitch, a now Talend-owned company that was originally built on the kind of open source Singer specification for data connections, which I spent a fair while building connectors for in those mystical days gone by where I didn't do everything by talking to a prompt. And once more, when it comes to connectors, Stitch has a fairly comprehensive library of some of the most standard ones you'll see in data engineering. And once again, they've tagged them as like enterprise or standard, depending on their support level for that particular connector. And you have some community ones in here. Now, of the tools we've seen so far, Stitch is probably the most no-code kind of solution, where pretty much everything is done via their UI and their interface, and they see themselves as pitching to beyond data teams for this reason. So you can just give everybody a tool and say, connect what you want to whatever you want. But then in terms of extensibility, they're going to push you towards the Singer ecosystem, which may or may not be the best for people who aren't comfortable developing data connectors. It does make it a lot easier, but you still have to kind of understand what's going on, how APIs work, and or how whatever you're connecting to works and whatever you're sending it to works. So as much as it gives you a little framework to develop in, it doesn't take away all of the effort. In terms of pricing, obviously there is a benefit if you're already in the Talend ecosystem. But once again, Stitch has kind of like a usage-based tier, and it goes on to more corporate and enterprise tiers later on, where you actually end up paying per kind of row loaded in Stitch or active rows, which can be a little difficult to calculate. Nevertheless, Stitch can work out as one of the kind of cheaper tools, but I would probably say at that tier, don't expect much in the way of support, particularly if there's issues with any of their verified connectors or anything like that. It can be a little cumbersome to try and fix. So again, overall, Stitch looks good. Looks like it could do the job for most teams, but did it really add anything that we didn't get from previous tools? Not particularly. Might just be a little cheaper sometimes, but you get what you pay for. So please let us know which tools you're using or considering for your next project or team, and let us know why. Cheers.